we all know the tagline, nothing feels like a Mizuno, and currently I'm dressed like a Mizuno bag as well. But what have Mizuno done with their new models, and does nothing still feel like a Mizuno? We're going to start with a completely new addition to Mizuno's line this year, and this is the S3. So the S3 is it's a sort of standalone line. I believe there may be another model at some point within this range, but essentially this takes over from the 923 Tour, the JPX Tour kind of series, in that it's that matte finish, blade-like. The 923 Tour or the 900 Tour was originally designed more for Brooks Koepka than anyone else, but it retains very little technology. There's a little bit of mass positioning, but a very, almost like a kind of a muscle cavity Titleist CB style head. We're literally looking at a bit of mass position down the bottom to give a bit more margin for error, a little bit of help in launch, just getting the CG into the bottom of the ball. There is no face technology, there is no extra ball speed. This is your kind of one-piece forged classic Mizuno head. Gone with the Mizuno Pro writing, which is actually quite attractive. You can see that stepping of the weight, and this will progress up and down the back of the head a little bit as you go into the lower loft and the higher lofts. One thing they have done quite differently, I'm just going to grab one of the MP heads here, the 243. On the sole of the club here, you can see that kind of killed beveled leading edge, which what that does on the S3 model here versus the 243 that doesn't have that, is that just produces a little bit of protection when the turf's a bit softer, just helps a little bit of turf interaction, helps that leading edge not catch, so the head glides through the turf a little bit more. So that is something where in this head there's a little bit of back edge relief as well. We'll see that in other models as we go further through this review video. But that is one area where this head has been adapted a little bit more. So it's not that sharp leading edge sort of blade style, traditional blade style head that we're used to seeing. There is a little bit of sole progression, which we do it on wedges. It's done actually on kind of leading edges of hybrids and fairway woods and back edges, that progression to help the turf interaction. So why not an iron? And this is something that Mizuno are introducing with this. But essentially, I'll give this a hit, 7-iron. It's a very classic, clean, very clean head shape. Very, very square leading edge, very straight line through from the hosel through the leading edge of the club, minimal offset. So very, very traditional head shape. It's a classic soft feeling, kind of mid-spin, mid-launch, no real tech in it. I've hit that quite nicely straight at the pin, but it's a bit short. But it's a nice feeling head. There's nothing that I would say is exceptional about it, but then that's not going to be possible because there is no tech in it. But it's for your classic blade style player, wants a little bit of help. The more matted down finish does differentiate from the MP range. So spin wise, 6-1 for a 7-iron. So I'm not a high spinner with my irons. So maintains a moderate launch, moderate spin, just a very, very classic overall head shape. Going from 4-iron through pitch wedge. Addition to the line, but nothing exceptional about this head overall, just a classic shape. We then come on to the 925 range of JPX. So this is the 925 forged. Now the one thing I don't have as yet is we're before the embargo dates from Mizuno, and I do not have all the tech info on what they've done with this head. So we will do a follow-up. Once I get that, we'll do a follow-up on these heads and give you exactly what they've done. But unfortunately, partly due to Christmas periods and things, I haven't had that information through from Mizuno. So I will tell you what it does, and we'll talk about how it differentiates a little bit from the 923 forged. And we'll hit a shot, talk about the performance, but I will give you all that detailed tech info as soon as I have that, and that'll follow in the coming few weeks. So what's different about this than the 923? Again, sole shaping. As was on the S3, we've got that beveled leading edge, and then softened back edge. So again, that helps sort of just soften that leading edge getting into the turf, and that trail relief helps the club exit the turf as well. So that's something that they've put into the 925 forged. And that's certainly going to help. We've seen it on other brands as well, kind of angled sole shapes, helps the turf interaction, helps maintain club speed through the turf in principle, and just reduces drag overall. It is quite a neat head shape. So again, a little bit less offset potentially than previous models. Very, very neat, sort of simple looking top line. Again, we'll give you a looking down on the head view as a background image whilst we're talking about this. Very, very simple shape. They haven't gone to town on this one in that respect. It's very classic. It's something that, you know, actually a lot of traditionalists will like. It's not an overly long head, but there's a little bit of height to it. So kind of catering very much, this is what I would call in the kind of the crossover between the JPX and the MP range. Traditionally, I'm going to the 923 range, the 923 forged and the MP, the 243, 245 in particular, there was a real overlap. The 923 forged didn't really gain a huge amount of forgiveness. There was some, but not a huge amount versus the MP series. This one, there's definitely that little bit more perimeter weighting. There's a bit more depth to the head and the toe area. They've got more weight around the perimeter of the head here. And you know, that structure in the back, it's a badge in the back, but it's kind of showing you a little bit of what the structure is in behind it, a little bit of support for the face and for the frame of the head. Now obviously the key is in the word forged. It is a forged frame versus the nickel chromaloy that's in the 925 hot metal series. So there's a little less rigidity to the structure, which is going to mean a little less ball speed, but certainly they will have adapted the face in this head to gain as much ball speed as possible. We talked about it with other models, lighter, thinner face allows them to save a bit of weight there and move weight around to the perimeter, particularly into the sole of the club. Certainly would be something that all the brands will be doing, and Mizuno will be exactly the same with this, but again, the exact details I will get onto you as soon as they give them to me. But yeah, ultimately this head, for me, the main takeaway from this head is it's more forgiving than 923. So if you're looking for a head that gives you a kind of relative player's look to it, but a little bit of margin for error, this is one to go to. So let's give it a hit and see what the numbers say. So we've got the data up from the S3 iron on the screen there. Now, loft-wise, there's a 4-degree difference between these two 7-irons. So we're going to see some yardage difference because of that, and a little bit of spin difference, but it'll be interesting getting that comparison between a head which is that stepping stone into a head with forgiveness and technology, versus a kind of one-piece traditional forged product. So again, visually it's a very neat looking head. I think they've done a really good job with the visuals on this. So not my finest strike, but certainly the club head stays with the contact quite nicely, a little bit out the heel. But what we can see here is the actually quite well hit 7-iron with the previous model didn't quite make the green. This one got to the green. So even a less than perfect strike is still giving me a little bit of margin of error. But we're seeing spin down. Now that one's down at 5.152. If I can get a cleaner hit. What is noticeable is it's not a clicky sound. There is definitely some we use the term tech. There's certainly that bit of thinness to the face where you can hear there's a little bit of a higher pitched note, but it's not a harsh sound to it. So, you know, spin very, very consistent. Both of those are 5.1, 5.150. So very consistent spin. Neither absolutely right out the heart of the club head, but they pitched within about a yard of one another. So I think that's, to me, is the big takeaway from this model. I think 923 forged could have been better at forgiveness, and that's certainly the bit on this head that's been addressed. Slightly more versatility in the sole shape, slightly neater line through the hosel into the leading edge, but definitely a more forgiving head, and that'll be really noticeable in the longer irons. What they have added to this range and this model this year is there is a black version, which, yeah, there's always been these sort of hero products that they've launched that are limited runs and limited numbers. This will be in line this year. So nothing changes, lofts are the same, you know, clubs offer the same 4-iron down to gap wedge, I believe. I will confirm whether they're a left hand in this or not. I believe quite often it's only right hand in these. So lefties are still a little bit left out often, but I will confirm that as soon as I have that. But this is an inline product. It's not a limited range. This product will be running through the entire life cycle as we understand it. But giving players that black-headed option, as you can see, they've faded out the face for where the contact comes, because otherwise that would wear quite heavily. You will see on the sole of the club in particular, where it has contact with the ground, that will fade a little bit over time. But you know, lots of people like the black club heads, and I think to get this inline is a clever route from Mizuno to have something that none of the other brands really offer as a standard inline product. So those are the iron additions. As you can see, there are a couple of wedges in the bag here. So let's move on to those. So as you can see, there are a few wedges in the bag here, and there are two series of wedges. There's the T1, which is the carryover from the T24, and there's the T3, which is a new head for Mizuno this year. So we'll take the T1, we'll look at that one first. Now, I've taken the blue head out. They're doing the Tour Satin black IP and the blue IP finish. Yeah, the black and the blue have always been a little bit more limited, blue more limited in the past, but these will run through all the lofts, all the loft and lie and bounce options. So what's changed with this head? Well, one of the things that's really quite noticeable is where the mass is placed. Now I'm going to get one of the T24 heads to compare here. So what pretty much all wedge brands are trying to do is to get the mass up the top of the head, which takes the centre of gravity up, which launches the ball lower and spins it more. So as you can see on the T24, it's slightly thicker on this lower part of the head here. But what they've done on the T1 wedges is exaggerated that a little bit further. So you'll see there's a little bit of a scoop out of the head here. And they've taken weight out here, added it at the top. And that carries across all the different lofts in this range. It's about getting launched down and spin up, which is something from a technique point of view we're all trying to do. So mass positioning key there. The other part is the sole shapes. The grinds are a little bit more versatile. So when we first saw them, my initial thought was, okay, the soles are a bit wider. And so these are both the V grinds. Now they've got the S grind, P grind, V grind, and M grind, and a C grind in there as well. But what you can see from these, and these are both the V grinds, is that the high point, the peak of the sole of the bounce is a little bit further back on the new model versus a little bit more central and then more aggressively angled off. Now that, if you're opening the face up a lot, is absolutely fine, but it can be a little unforgiving on softer turf. And my gut feel with this is that the sole shapes on the T1s are going to be a little more sympathetic to the less skilled player, in that they're just a little bit more versatile. You know, a narrow sole shape and a narrow bounce just gives you less sole to actually use to gauge the depth of the shot. So having a slightly more sympathetic sole shape, a little bit of a more graduated, wider bounce, just means easier to use. So ultimately, you don't have to be quite as exacting, which for all of us, whatever standard we are, is a good thing. Performance-wise, so we've got 258-degree wedges here, and there's a limit on what can be done with the grooves. There are limits on width, depth, shape, angles of the edges. So it's really a case of, well, what's possible? Now, there's a marginally different look. There's milling in between the grooves as there is on all of them. They're going to be pushing everything to the limits. So let's have a little look at what do they actually do from a launch and a spin point of view. So these are both 58-degree wedges. I'm going to look at the spin number in particular on the screen there. So it's certainly a softer feel. Mizuno are one of the few brands that produce a forged wedge. This is a forged head. But it still, whilst it feels soft, it still feels quite solid. Where that weight up the face, what it gives you is a bit of mass behind the ball rather than getting high up the face and getting a bit dead where there isn't the mass. So that definitely helps the feeling off the club face. So for that one at a 54-yard carry, 8.8 on spin, that's pretty good. I'm going to do one more just to get a base comparison point, and then we'll do a couple with the old wedge. So 8.8, 50. So feels like it rips off the face quite nicely. So it'd be interesting to see where this one comes. That came in a little bit lower. But looking at the spin number here, 8.7. So in 48-yard carry, that's a lot of spin. Mizuno with the T24s were surprisingly high for spin rates. So it's somewhere that I think they're a little underrated. But in terms of producing heavy spin numbers, if you want a lot of spin, the Mizuno heads look to still be really good. So let's see where this comparison comes. So this is with the T24. So let's play the same shot. Definitely slightly higher launch. Interesting straight away that. Now some of that's the grind, that more graduated back edge that's popped up a little bit more. But it didn't feel quite as solid either. So 8.6, still pretty good for spin, but definitely a little bit of a higher launch. Let's do one more here, because I see it hit the screen a little bit higher. Yeah, it's marginally less of a solid feel, which really can only go down to where that mass placement is. So quite a nice shot. But again, let's see that spin number 8-1. So consistency of spin. Both felt quite solid strikes, but what we're seeing out of that comparison between the two, and some of it could be just the sole shape being, say, a little bit more sympathetic, so it's more consistent in terms of how it goes through the turf or the mat in this instance, but that mass placed a little higher up just retains a bit more consistency of spin. So in that respect, that's a good change. There is one other wedge head that Mizuno have launched this year, which is the T3. Again, forged frame of the head. This one's got a slightly wider sole shape, but we've got that bit of perimeter weighting there. So visually it's quite similar to that S3 iron we looked at earlier on. But I think where this is quite nice is it gives a little bit more versatility to the sole shape. So what I'm going to do is look at this comparison here, is like with the 925 forged iron, we've got that slightly beveled leading edge, which protects that leading edge on softer turf a bit more. But we've got beveling here and then a bit of trail edge relief, with a flatter spot in the centre. So rather than being quite as peaked up and over, that width and that softer progression to the sole shape just gives it a little bit more margin of error. It's slightly more forgiving as a sole shape, but with also visually a little bit of perimeter weighting too. Now this one's got a little bit less loft to it, but it'll be interesting again to see where this comes up from a spin side of things. It's visually very slightly bigger in head shape, and we'll show this visual, but actually very similar in head shape actually. We'll put a still of that image down. So for a head that's designed to be a little bit more forgiving, still quite a tight shape to it, but definitely that little bit more sole shape gives a bit more to use in terms of contact. So where this is a lower loft, what we can see here, a little bit of a higher launch. Now this is a 56, which is launched certainly at least as high as a 58 did. So popped up a little bit more, which is going to happen when there's that bit more mass down the bottom of the head. 8,000 spin, so again, considering this is less loft, there's still decent spin retention there. So if I do one more on this, so you'd expect a little bit of a drop off in spin. Still keeps quite a soft feel to it. Yes, a little less solidity because the weight sits a little bit lower, but it's still a really nice feeling head. I think that's actually quite important when it comes to the wedges. So for this one, 7.8. So yes, we're lower loft, but actually to retain that amount of spin on that length of shot at this loft, the 2-degree loft difference there, still quite impressive. So same kind of face tread and face pattern to the T-series wedges, but this one just gives you that option for a little bit of a wider sole without giving up that soft forged feel that Mizuno are actually still very well known for. So if you do still want something that feels like a Mizuno, then you can still get it from a Mizuno club.